Hi, everyone. Welcome. We are all so excited to see so many of you all here today joining us for this 325X webinar. We have a great size group, and so we're super excited to be able to engage with you all. Today's webinar topic is From Data to Impact, Navigating Program Evaluation for OSEP 325X Grantees. I am Aniva Lumpkins, and I'm one of the program directors for the Dream Center. We have a lot of amazing things planned for you here today. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to get us started. What you're going to see here is that we would love to be able to know exactly who is here with us, joining us here today for this topic. And so I'd like to welcome you on behalf of our full team at the Dream Center. Please take a moment to just share your name, your institution, and your project role in the chat for us. We'd love to be able to kind of get a sense of who's here. As you all are doing that, I'm going to go through just a bit of housekeeping for us. And so, as many of you all might have noticed as you were joining today's Zoom session, we are recording this webinar. And our hopes are that we might be able to share information with you all following today's session. Please feel free to engage in the chat, and so you can submit your questions in the chat, and our team is ready to assist. Feel free also to share any insights that you have as we're going through the subject matter, and you all can reply to each other. We're creating that nice community of care here today, okay? So what will happen is you'll see, just as always, we'll provide key resources from today's session. That's including the recording, any documents that we might review, as well as any frequently asked questions that come up. And so that follow-up will be provided moving forward. I see a number of people responding in the chat. That's great to see. So thank you all so much. We have great representation. We have Jackson State in the house, Virginia State. I can see that we have others from, we have quite a few teams. We have a good team here. Alabama A&M is in the house. We have Morgan State in the house as well. Dr. Theodore, thanks for joining us. Thank you all so much for putting this information in the chat. We will definitely reference it as we kind of move forward with today's session. Okay, so what I'd like to be able to do is go through with you a little bit about our learning objectives for the day. Okay, and so our general hope is that today you all will be able to have a good understanding of the differences between program evaluation and research. We hope that you'll be able to gain a better understanding of how to actualize the initial evaluation plans that you've submitted, analyze logic models and how that data collection might shift as you admit students. And then you're going to see that there's some time will be spent where you'll have an opportunity to actually practice developing questions for program evaluation surveys. Okay, so we have a lot that's packed in today's session. And so we're super excited to be able to get started in that way. One thing that we wanted to be able to do is have a little bit of a check-in with you all. And so we know that program evaluation efforts are things that some are a bit more comfortable with and others not so much. And so we ask, what might best describe your current status of your 325X program evaluation efforts? And so in the chat, we're going to ask that you actually put either 1, 2, 3, or 4 to describe your actual placement with that. And so are you actively implementing your evaluation plan and collecting data? Do you feel like you have a plan, but implementation has been a bit slower than expected? You might put 3 for revising or refining your original evaluation plan. Or are you someone who's just getting started or you're a bit unsure of where to begin? Okay, good. So I'm seeing a lot of 2s come through here. So some of you feel like you have a plan, but maybe implementation has been a bit slower than you expected. Good, okay. So I'm seeing some 2s come through. Okay, so it sounds like many of us are in the same place. And so as we move forward with today's session, we'll be able to do a bit more of a check-in on that regard to be sure that we have a good sense of where everyone is. And I know that Dr. Gelbar, who's here with us today, is going to be able to touch bases with you all as he moves forward with the information. And so with that being said, I feel it is certainly an honor and a privilege to be able to share with you all who will be conducting the rest of today's webinar session in navigating program evaluation. We have Dr. Nicholas Gelbar with us here today. He's our Dream External Evaluator. And he's going to be diving into this topic. Again, feel free. I will be monitoring the chat to ask any questions as they come up, and we will have a period of time where we'll be able to touch basis on any questions that come up. Handing it over to you, Dr. Gelbar.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to be here. I love talking about program evaluation. Some of you are the program evaluator, and I've served in that role before. I was an evaluator for an OSEP project that it was actually refunded, and now I'm serving as the external evaluator for this project. So I've been on this side where you're on the outside getting the information, and then when you're on the inside racing to get information. And I've also was an evaluator for a personnel prep grant, which is a little bit different in sense that that gives money directly to the students and to the scholars, whereas you guys are getting the money to develop programs, right? So there's a difference there, but there's a lot of things that are very similar. Please ask questions at any point or make comments. Like I think if we can really share wisdom and kind of I want this to be more of like a collective thing, not so much me just sort of sitting here droning on about program evaluation. Please do that. All right, so what is program evaluation, right? It's basically we're collecting data to figure out does something work for the people who received it, right? So we're using data collection, we're trying to figure out is it effective and is it efficient, right? So it's sort of what's working well in a program, what areas need improvement, how do we have continuous improvement happen, right? How you're in the process of developing a new program. How do you set the stage for that so that as you have to speak to accreditors and other people, you're collecting the data you need in order to do that, right? So it's not just this is not just what OSEP needs from you, but it's sort of like how do you set yourself up so you have the information you need as you're going through other policies and procedures that you need to do. Is everything working the way that it's intended to work? And is everyone receiving sort of what they need from the program? It's different than research. A lot of us do research or we've done research, we're trained in research. It's less common for people to be trained in program evaluation. Some people are. I'm sure many of you on this call are, but a lot of times when we get our PhDs, like we get research and we get like ingrained in all of these things that we've learned in order to think about collecting data, right? And I think it's important for us to take a second to remember the differences between program evaluation and research, right? So research at the end of the day, I'm trying to create generalizable knowledge, right? That this intervention works. That if I was to interview similar people, I'm going to get similar themes from them based on their experiences. Putting everything on the table, I'm really a quantitative researcher. I dabble in qualitative research. So, like, I'll reference qualitative things, but my wife is a qualitative researcher and when I always ask her questions for those things. We get really concerned in research, especially like you go through all the research methods classes, and in an ideal sense, they hammer home all of those things about response rates and the number of people who leave studies and all of these things that are really important because if things are going to be generalizable, we have to know like boy, we want to make sure that the intervention works for the people as it's intended to work, that there wasn't bias in the study, all of those things. Program evaluation, we're not bound by any of that because it's practical, it's applied. It's about let's collect data, let's figure out if something's working for the people who received it. We're not worried about trying to make big statements that it's going to work for everybody. It's just you're developing a new personnel prep program. Does that work for the consumers of that program? Do they get what they need to get? Do they learn the evidence-based practices that they need to learn in order to be effective practitioners in the field? To me, that's I think what the most important part of that is. And it's really saying like, here, did it work and did it achieve its intended outcomes or not? So maybe only 80% of people take the survey. Maybe 50% of people take the survey. Whoever took the survey, we just report on it. We just report the data that we have. We can't do anything about it. We don't have to worry about reviewer two. Those of you who've published lots of research, right? You put it into a peer-reviewed journal. Reviewer two is always the one who gives you the feedback that you're like, did you read the article or not? Whereas in program evaluation, it's just I'm just telling OSEP, here's what we did. We submitted these syllabi. These syllabi show that we're implementing the evidence-based practices in our field. So that's, I think, like the difference. And I think sometimes when researchers go into the program evaluation mode, when we do this, we get sort of caught up in all of our researcher, like things need to be perfect and the survey needs to be perfect and all of those things. Where I think program evaluation, you need to have the data, you need to have like the ability to share that data. But if 50% of students fill out the survey, that's great. Or 50% of participants in a training fill out a survey, that's wonderful. I'm going to talk about things that help us have as many of those students give us the information as we can, and so that we're doing the best that we can with all of those things. But that's really kind of like where we are. So it's like this thing of like it feels like research, but it's not research. So we have to sometimes remind ourselves and give ourselves permission, like it doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be. People get all kind of caught up in the idea of formative versus summative assessment, like sort of formative being what we do along the way, summative being like at the end of a program, if there's like a natural end date or end cycle or a cohort ends or people graduate, those pieces. Sometimes it's a little bit more fluid than that in program evaluation because sometimes there's like milestones that they hit that cause like a summative assessment. And then sometimes but that speaks to the next part of the process, right? Like you complete practicum and then you're going to go off on internship, right? Like there's a summative assessment that's how you did with practicum. Then but it's formative because it informs us like, do we need to make changes in our clinical handbooks and how we make things clear and how we work with sites as we put people into internship, for example, like those pieces. So I think like sometimes those are like arbitrary distinctions, but what all of this gets at and why it's important to think about formative versus summative is there's gonna be a slide that shows this in a second, but we don't want any surprises, right? We need to be collecting data in an ongoing basis because the worst thing to do is get to the end of a project and then all of the people who participated in the project are like, yeah, I feel okay about how I've been trained. Whereas like if we kind of had benchmarks and things ahead of time, we have that sense of, okay, great, like we can make some course corrections, we can make some changes. All of you are building the plane while you're flying it, like you're building a program, and then you're going to start enrolling students, and then you have to make sure those students are satisfied and that they're learning while you're still like going to be putting everything together. It's one thing to build syllabi, it's one thing to get everything through the committees at a university to get the state accreditors to let you go through everything, but then you actually have to teach the classes, so then you have to put all of that material together. So it's how do we make sure that we create time and space and make the evaluation simple enough that we're able to carry it forward, which gets at this point of evaluation isn't just at the end. It really needs to be a cycle. We need to be doing it the whole way. Again, with our researcher hat, sometimes we get into this place of like, let's ask every single possible question that we can ask. And I think with program evaluation, I think shorter is better. People take shorter surveys. The shorter it is, the more likely they are to do it. And if it's also something that just happens regularly, that definitely is important where like they know, okay, in this program, we're going to receive these surveys every so often. And it just gets kind of built into the culture. I don't know how many of you get these. I still get like the alumni surveys for accreditation for programs that I've graduated from that you have to fill out and do your thing and like be a good citizen so that you give that feedback, even though it's been a long time since I graduated. And that's like the piece here of I was taking those when I was in the program, right? So it's just a habit of like I know like every semester I'm going to get a survey from them and that it's a part of all of this. Obviously, evaluation isn't just for OSEP reporting, right? Well, you have to do some reporting on it to OSEP, but you also like you need to be setting up future reporting to accrediting agencies and those things to say like, hey, these people who are coming trained as teachers, these people who are being trained as school psychologists, as speech language pathologists, whatever, whoever you're training, that like the program is working, it's achieving its intended outcomes, right? And that's how we know and how we can do things. And this is this slide. The world is so scary. I told Gemini to create an image that illustrated how you want no surprises in program evaluation. And the AI created this image, which is so interesting, right? Like all of the things that they said of like keep calm and enforce standard operating procedures, expect the expected, they created this whole thing about no surprises. But that's like the key takeaway for me. Like one of the things is we have to be continuously evaluating, especially students. We're going to talk a little bit about how there's one of the performance measures, like I think you guys have talked about in other webinars, but how you show that you've implemented evidence-based practices in the courses. That's relatively simple. It's the stuff with students and getting them to buy into it and getting them to continue to do that and to give you meaningful feedback. And that's why I think you need to start early with them and be thinking beyond sort of like as they move towards graduation, like how am I going to evaluate all the way to that point? What information do I need? Who are other stakeholders at the university for state accrediting agencies, other things like that I'm going to need to feed that information to professional organizations, whoever's doing that. How do I think about that in terms of this? Um, but I don't want any surprises, right? So you're all at the crossroads of your project. I sort of tried to demonstrate that, right? Like by the end of year two, you had to have the program approved by the university. By the end of year three, you have to show that you have the infrastructure in place to begin recruiting students. By the end of year four, you need to have admitted students so that by year five, students are actually taking courses and that they are, they're receiving everything there. And right, and there's like benchmarks along the way that OSEP says if you're going to have continued funding, you need to show that you're doing all of these things. And a lot of the first part of the grant, the first 3 to 4 years is all about getting it off the ground. And then at the end, they're like, and by the way, now you have students, right? And that's kind of a thing. So you're at this crossroads of, but you need to be thinking about those future students and thinking about how can I do some work now for evaluation so that I can set the stage so I'm not running around in year five being like, what do I have to do? What do I have to evaluate? What do I need to think about in terms of gathering all of this information? Right. And right, this kind of just reiterated that point that at the end of year three, they sort of say, like, are we there? Are we going to be in that place of you have everything in place and it looks like the program's going to be a go? So then the funding continues. So you can do the last work you need to do to then admit those students in year five, right? Like that's kind of the where this all kind of leads to. So there's sort of like the first half is all about your actions, right? Evaluating your actions. Did the syllabi include the evidence-based practices? Do you have the permissions from all the people who need to give you the permissions? How is all of that working and structuring? Do all of the state level people, have they given the approval? Like all of those things that go into place. And then at the end, it's then how do I start to think about students and how students are working? And what do I need to make sure that this whole program works as it's intended to work because it's going to live past this grant and there's going to be people who are going to want to look at the data from the program past the life of this grant as you think ahead. Now, OSEP's not asking for that. OSEP's not funding your students, but I think it's important to think about the realities of other constituencies are going to want to know whether the program works or not. And are you collecting that information? And can you start on the groundwork for doing that, right? Because again, you're at this tipping point of from developing to implementing, where when you first got the grant, thinking about actually having students in the program was far in the distance. You were like, what's the program mission going to be? What are the program things I need to put in place? What are the courses going to look like? All of those pieces, getting approval for all of that, which is its own fun thing in the bureaucracy of higher education, then having it to take it to the state level, then showing like you're going to be able to recruit students and you're going to be able to get students to join a program that is just getting off the ground, right? Like all of those challenges are in place. And then you're going to have students, and then the program starts, and then you just have to keep it going from there. So you're at a really interesting kind of tipping point, inflection point to thinking about shifting ideas of evaluation and thinking ahead to future evaluations. And you have two program measures you have to speak on, right? The first one is the percentage of preparation programs that incorporate scientifically based research or evidence-based practices into their curricula, right? So you have to show you're developing a new program and you're doing all of these things. So, right, it's in the syllabi, like, right, these are the evidence-based practices that we're putting into the syllabi. This is how we're teaching all of these things. This is how it was in the program philosophy, the mission statement, all of those pieces that you would do for this program measure, right? Like there's a lot of paperwork here that's just sort of like these things are there, right? We've based it on CEC standards or ASHA standards. We've done, NASP standards. We've done all of those pieces to make sure that for our field, whatever that field is that you're a part of, that you've done all those things, right? So that from the beginning, you're doing all of those things. Are there questions about how evaluation worked for that program measure? Because most of the rest of this, I was planning on talking mostly about how we talk about number two.
I had a as I was doing my report, I had a question. And as I'm continuing the approval process, there's another 5 months left. And so it makes the annual report look like, all right, you're not there, when it's going in there and coming in around this time. Like, is that something that people look in these annual measures are ready to see? Because I mean, really, we're only like 7 to 5 months in, and the final gateways on a lot of these approvals are those long, slow procedures that are going to finish out in like August, September for some of us. And just, yeah, where things are out there.
In my experience with this, they know that when you file the annual report, it's different from the actuality of the end of the year. You report on a weird period always, right? It's always a
Right.
slightly different thing than the actual grant funding because it's just sort of the GPRA measures all get tabulated, across all of the Department of Education, and that's sent in a report to Congress. So it's based on that timing versus the timing that's actually relevant to your grant. But I think if in the annual report you can say like we're at these milestones and we're projecting that it's going to be
Right.
finished by the end of the year. And I think that's what the important thing to show is like it would finish by the date that it would be expected to be finished by that, we're in the middle of year three now, and by the end of year three, we'll be there. Or by the end of year, if we're in the middle of year two, in the middle of, it'll finish there. People who read it understand that in some ways it's an arbitrary point of time in which you're reporting versus like something that's much more targeted within your project lifespan, right? So I think making sure that if you can show like we've set the stage and like there are things that are out of your control as well in terms of how long those procedures take at a
Right.
university, and like when the
And
meetings get scheduled, because you have to get it approved at every level of the bureaucracy to get it there.
yeah, I think, and I may be speaking for others to be so bold, but like it does make one nervous as a PI when there are those hard continuation of funding deadlines set, and the most recent report will be 5 months ago,
Right.
perhaps when they're making those continuing judgments. So it's sort of like it makes us a little anxious.
Right. And it is anxiety provoking. Like I'm gonna agree with you there because if I
Yeah.
tried to put myself in your shoes as I was developing this, and I was like, wow, what if there's some reason that like a snowstorm happens and then a meeting like at the at the university level or college level doesn't happen, like that could set you back by like a month or so. I from what As I was poking around and asking some other people, what I found is as long as you can say like, and then the meeting is going to be next month, and like, so while we miss the deadline, it's going to be next month and it's going to get there. You
Yeah.
should be okay to say like, we're on the agenda, it's going there. Like that's the piece of it. I think if you're like 6 months behind, I think that's when it starts to be a little where
Sure.
I think you would probably be having more frequent in conversations with the
Engagement.
project officer to be like, hey, these are the things that are out of my control, and I can document that they're out of my control. And this is why this is taking so long. Or like there was this shift that happened, or they changed these forms at the university, because that also happens is and is real fun too, when they're like,
Glad you said
hey,
that one because that's totally in my report.
yeah, but because I think that's a piece of it is like they change the forms or they change the procedures or they
Right.
change the order, and some of your universities want it in a very lockstep fashion, and then like I'm affiliated with the University of Connecticut, and so you can get approval like kind of concurrently at different levels. Like you can get it from the grad school because we have a grad school, but while you're also getting it from your home college and department. You have to get department and then college, but you can kind of do things parallel to each other. They just want to know before it goes to the Board of Trustees that all three entities have approved, and then it can go to the Board of Trustees. So there's like things like that happen. And I think if you were behind and you feel like you are behind, I would reach out to your project officer and talk to them about it and say like, look, I've done all of these steps. It's not me. There are other factors in play, and they're just, sometimes universities, they understand things are grant funded and they'll try to expedite or move you up in the list.
Right.
And sometimes they don't. Or sometimes, I've referenced reviewer two from like when you get peer reviews. Sometimes your colleagues on CNC committees are also like reviewer two, where they don't get what you're saying. And so that holds up the process because you have to sort of like explain that in your field, this is like you need these courses and these things. So there's a lot of bureaucracy like for this first program measure and for all those sort of continuation measures, there's a lot like it's scary and I completely understand it. So I think if you can show that and just have
Yeah.
that documentation that's like it was emailed at this point, it went to this people, we're on this calendar, we're on this agenda to show like things are moving forward and that they're proceeding at the pace that they proceed at a university, which is glacial at times. Having had programs be approved, you sit in that meeting and you're like, I hope everyone loves that.
Yeah, I was just putting that thing in
Right,
there.
right, right. You're
Yeah.
hiring someone to help you with all of this, and then you're like, but what if the funding goes away? Like you're basically like, I could hire you, but
I'm calmer. I'm a little
okay, good.
calmer.
I'm
I'm
glad because
always high
from
strung. You
what
can
I
ask
understand,
anyone on the
they
team.
know that it's going to take time, especially when the state level, which you have zero control over, right? In your university, you can influence, but the state level, and that's why I think they set it up so there's a couple years for that, so that like if there were things that went in place. So that's program measure one, which is, and is something. Program measure two is about the students that they'll have the knowledge and skills. What's interesting is when the time your funding is done, you've enrolled students. So you sort of like you're showing that if they do participate, that they will receive these knowledge and skills and evidence-based practices that improve outcomes for children with disabilities. So there's this interesting piece of for OSEP itself, like you can kind of report very like proximal measures of that they were satisfied maybe in their first semester or something like that. But you really because they're not funded from OSEP. There's a piece here of you'll really know that by the time they graduate, which is outside of the funding period. So it's interesting you have to report on it, even though in a sense you get to see like they will be on that pathway, but they're not anywhere close to where they need to be by the end of the grant, right? So there's sort of this piece of this that's sort of like if you had personnel prep funds and the other funding mechanism where you were funding scholars, you'd have to report on this and you would have a couple cohorts that you could report on where you would have their data and you'd be able to say these few cohorts graduated, we can report on that. The last couple cohorts you don't collect that data within the scope of it, but there's other mechanisms in place and they have to report that data directly to OSEP, whereas for all of you it's sort of like did you enroll students? Great, that's what the X got you. It got you from nothing to building a program, doing all of the steps, and then the students enter, and then the funding leaves. And that's sort of where you end up. But I think there's a lot of other people who want to know that it works. If you're starting a school psych program or you're augmenting a school psych program, and you're going to have to show data to NASPO what you've done, or for to different state accreditors about what you're doing in terms of CE standards and all of those pieces. So still want to think about collecting that data from students. Right. When you submitted the grant, you had to show you were going to do evaluation, right? And you were judged on if it was thorough, feasible, and appropriate to the goals, objectives, and expected outcomes of the project and the extent to which it uses performance feedback, right? Like at the outset of this grant, it was known you weren't going to be graduating students in the funding time, but are you going to be able to be doing periodic assessment that says like, we're going to get there, right? Right now, you're all in the place of you're doing evaluation on yourselves where you're like, okay, I've submitted all the syllabi. They've gotten through the whichever like level committees at the department, at the college and university level, depending on how it works. I've done all those things. Here's all the agendas. Here's that they're approved. And as that racks up, and then this is how I've applied to what I need to do to the state for certification purposes. I've worked with these entities on my campus to do that. Here are the things I've done. So you're sort of like, you have like milestones and you're showing you're working towards all of those milestones. We also have to start thinking about ahead. I'm going to have these students. How am I going to make sure that I'm collecting that data in advance so I'm not scrambling when I'm like, oh, wait, I should have been collecting data the whole time, but now I need to start thinking about it as we move forward. You had to show that you had measurable intended project outcomes. You had to have a logic model. You had to have a conceptual framework, and you had to have basically an evaluation plan, like in a very like broad sense, as much as you can have one in a grant application, right? It's always the beginnings of an evaluation plan. It's always the starting point because there's never enough space and time to do a full, like every single measure you're going to use, like all those things. It's basically more about setting a framework for an evaluation plan versus an actual evaluation plan. And so now's the time when you sort of dust those things off and you're like, are we where we should be? Have we done all of the things that we're supposed to do? Are we getting the outputs and outcomes that we should be receiving? So again, like, are we moving forward in the process at all the levels for that? And then as we're thinking ahead to having students, now what do I need to do in terms of evaluating those students, knowing that they're not going to be graduated within the time frame, but how do I start to set that stage that's there? And all of you were kind of in that place from what I read of you had those evaluation plans, but now you're like, I'm also worried about getting everything approved, and it's taking a little bit longer than I'd like, so I'm sweating it a little bit. But I know I need to have students at some point here, and when I have those students, I'm going to need to collect some data from them to report back to OSEP to say like they were moving towards that second GPRA measure that exists. So you have a logic model. There are multiple variations of logic models. I am not a person who is very rigid about them. I think you can slice, dice, and julienne these things in multiple different ways. I've seen multiple different ways of doing it. I think what's the most important about a logic model, and some of you probably created your logic models, and now you're like, is that exactly what I'm going to be doing? Like, is that what I should be doing? I think like the more important thing is I think it helps you not be surprised at the end, right? Like the whole thing is you don't want any surprises. You don't want to do the last evaluation, survey to a cohort and find out they had really awful field experiences. You kind of want to know that in October of their field experiences, not in April or whenever the field experiences were. Oftentimes they look like you have what are the project goals? What are the activities you're going to do to get to those goals? What are the outputs? What are the specific deliverables that you can point to? And then there are outcomes, right? So like a goal is to have the program be approved by all the entities that need to approve it. Well, what are the activities? Well, first you have to develop the program, you have to develop all the syllabi. You're going to have all of those as outputs, right? Those are all the things. You're going to have all of those meeting minutes that say like this was approved, or those emails, that say this is approved. And all of those pieces in place. You're going to have the ways that, if one of your goals is to recruit students, right? So I'm going to recruit students. What am I going to do? Well, I'm going to need to have a plan for recruiting students, right? How am I going to do that, right? Well, I'm going to develop flyers, social media posts. I'm going to host workshops. I'm going to, use other communication strategies that my college or university has for potential future students. Most of us are doing grad program work. So maybe like we already have students who are undergrads that we can be outreaching to tell them about us. The outputs are how many people are signing up, how many of them are coming to if there are workshops or there are online things that you're doing, how many are coming, how many of them are completing interest forms. And then outcomes are how many of them apply, how many of them decide actually to come, right? So like this is like an example of the way a logic model works. It's more simplified. Sometimes they look like much more complicated because you'll get into like short-term outcomes, medium-term outcomes, long-term outcomes, like those pieces. But they still, if you break out the outcomes or not, it's the overall thing here is we had a goal of recruiting students. We did some things to do that. We can show how that outreach, like we got to 90 people, 10 of whom signed up for our program. I mean, honestly, starting a program with 10 people would be like a great thing. Like it's something to sneeze at, to have 10 people do that. And if you have 90 people who are interested and you get 10 of them or 9 of them to sign up, like that would be a great rate in terms of doing that. But then they are students, and now we need to think about and this is kind of beyond the scope of what OSEP wants, but I wanted to think past that a little bit because I think that's where it really comes to a place of now how do I start thinking ahead to be like, what's the data I collect with these students and how can I use some of the time and resources I've been given to develop this program to make sure I'm setting up that evaluation so that this program can sustain itself and continue to move forward. Right? How do I make sure we're providing exemplary pre-service training, right? So I have to infuse evidence-based practices into the courses. That's one of the activities I'm going to do. I also have to provide relevant field experiences that foster the implementation of evidence-based practices. I've said the word field experiences probably 10 or 15 times by now. And the reason I say that is, as a person who's evaluated personnel prep grants, field experiences, especially when you start a program, they're so important, but it's a lot of work to develop those relationships. And then there's the piece of the student who goes that you're sending to that field site has to, there's that match that has to happen. That sort of, when that match doesn't happen, it can be, that's a lot more work for you to sort of figure out how to make that work or not, So we don't want personality to be involved in things, but it always ends up being about those things. So field experience is one of those things you don't have a lot of control over. And especially as you start a program, you end up in this place of, I need these field experiences. And you might have offices that help you with this, and that would be wonderful. But you might not, and it might be you figuring out, like calling your local schools or your local clinics to figure out how you get these experiences and that they foster the implementation. And so I say that because, when you survey students about their experiences in the field experiences, that lets you know, should I keep that field experience or not? As well as you survey the people who provide the field experiences to figure out, did you offer them enough support? Did they feel the students were well prepared enough? Like all of those pieces. And it's something that, like, if you were just teaching classes and like you and your colleagues were teaching the classes, it's under your control and you can do everything about it. But once they leave you and they're out in that authentic real world, that's where I've seen where, especially when you're starting and you don't have the same field experiences, or you're kind of asking field experiences to do something different and new, you want to make sure you get all that information to be like, I want for cohort 2 to have a better field experience than cohort 1 did because we made improvements and we did those things that we need to do. Right. So we're providing exemplary pre-service training. We want to know that they're satisfied with the courses and that they've gained their knowledge, right? That they say, these courses taught me evidence-based practices, and I feel like I know those evidence-based practices now. And that depending on who accredits you, they're also going to want to know that, like, the assessment activities, the stuff that was built into your syllabi, that it shows that they're going to be able to demonstrate that knowledge, that they had the field experiences to go out and take the information from an assessment course and actually write assessment reports at the end of the day. So they could give the assessments, create the report from the assessments, and then they have that information. Or they could, take this information about a child, develop an intervention, monitor that intervention's effectiveness with a child, and be able to report on that data to parents and other school team members, right? And that all leads to this idea of the percentage of scholars completing the program who are knowledgeable and skilled in evidence-based practices, right? They're not going to graduate, so you're not going to be able to tell OSEP, it was wonderful and everything went perfectly according to plan and there were no problems, which I hope you get to say that. You're probably going to say, like, things could have been better and next time I'm going to do things better, because that's the way program evaluation really works. But if you can set yourself up for that and then thinking past the outcome, this outcome, but thinking in terms of, what do we need accreditors to know? How do we need to know that this is effective or not? So let's move on, right? So you all had some form of logic models that said some form of these things in them. My second key thing is, for evaluation, I always find it's good, especially many of you kind of reference the fact that there's multiple people on your project or people are coming into your project. I find creating a data collection schedule. So with the Dream Center and myself, we have a data collection schedule, and it breaks out by month every activity that's going to happen, and it says who's responsible for it. So is it something that's responsible for, is it something that the external evaluator is responsible for in the case of the Dream Center, or is it the internal evaluator? On your project, it might be, what's the PI going to do? What are some of the project staff going to do? What's the program evaluator going to do? Like, what are those things? And if you break it out by month, so that way you have like a clear sense of who's going to do what when, and you can use it to benchmark, like, are we doing what we need to do in terms of evaluation? Like, are we building ahead to that? Right? Are we doing all the projects that we need to do? Like, for example, I could be like, I'm going to spend January developing a field supervisor survey. It may only take me a couple hours, but I'm going to make it to myself that I'm going to develop that field supervisor survey. And then in February, I'm going to develop the survey for the students of the field experiences. So I'm building all of that in advance so that I'm not doing it while I'm in the middle of teaching practicum or while I'm in the middle of teaching internship and those things. Can I use some of the time that I've been given to develop those things so we're moving in that direction? So I think having a data collection schedule is really useful. When I talk to other evaluators, like we all share versions of this. This is a really simple one, but just that idea of set some benchmarks for yourself, space them out over time so that they're doable and it's not stressful. But then you can know, like, great, now when we get to the having the students, I have things in place and I know what I'm going to do in order to evaluate them. Want to take a second to, in the rest of this talk, we're going to talk about like how do we actually survey students and participants, in our programs. I suggest you start early so that the second that they accept and matriculate, that you send them some form of survey. Even if it's just a tell me who you are, answer these brief questions about yourself and your background, just so they get this sense of, oh, in this program, I got a survey. And then I like the first semester, I got a survey. And then the second semester, I got a survey. Um, I think that's really important because it sets the stage so that they know that there's a survey coming and you can talk about it and say, like, you need to do this. You need to, like, this is part of information we report on to whoever we report on to it, doing all of those things. As I said earlier, I think keeping them as focused as possible. So just like, what are the direct questions we need to answer for the logic model? What are the direct questions that were in the evaluation plan? Like those things. More is not necessarily better. The shorter the surveys, the more likely they are to complete it. I love qualitative research, but this is not qualitative research. This is program evaluation. Open-ended questions don't necessarily help you to answer those outcomes. I think it's important to get qualitative information, but I would ask as few open-ended questions as I can because I want to keep that targeted because it tends to turn people off to have to answer an open-ended question, and they tend to give you one-word responses. So sometimes they give you more. That's also sometimes the place, like having done a lot of program evaluation, that they talk about how like the air conditioning in this class didn't work, or like the internet went down that day, or they give you the feedback on stuff that's not actually like helpful. I've read enough training surveys that like talk about air conditioning, all of those things. So that's where people talk about those things. So like make it clear and make it so that if they were to answer with one word, that it told you something that like they were satisfied or not satisfied. They like this went well, those things. Like I think that's there. The other piece of it is consider having people develop some sort of code where it's like their birth year, um, you know, their favorite ice cream, flavor or something like that. So that way, every time they take the survey, they put in the code. It lets you link their surveys together while keeping them anonymous, but you can look across surveys to see their satisfaction, right? Because like if you're not satisfied in your first practicum, I want to make sure you are satisfied by your second practicum, right? Like that's how program evaluation can work. Unlike research, research we're sometimes not we're focused on the big picture level versus not so much did participant one make progress or not. We look at the whole thing where now we want to know, like we want to know every student that things improved, things got better, things went from there. So if there's a question, I'm actually going to go, I'm going to answer the question first. A code. So you ask them the same thing on the survey, like that they fill it in. So it's like their birth year, not their initials because that's identifiable, but some other form of information. Like it could be their birth year plus the zip code that they grew up in. So then that's their code. And that, like mine would be 1984 060820. That's my code, and I fill that out every time on the survey. You asked me what my zip code was growing up, and you asked me the year I was born. You put those things in on every survey. Now you can link my response across every survey and see that student who's anonymous to me. I can see that they've always had a great experience. They were having not as good of an experience, but now it's better, or this field experience wasn't going well for them. They're here. We can do those things. So it lets me look and track across. You can also do surveys that aren't anonymous. I find that can be tricky just in terms of people tend to feel better if it is anonymous, or at least that it's known to be anonymous to the faculty. My university, we have a office that does this where they would be able to tell who I was as a student when I filled out the survey, but that data is never reported to the faculty at the student level. They only get aggregated data. So the students know it's anonymous to the faculty at the university. So that's another way of doing that. Any other questions to this point?
Just curious, when students are taking already the university's course evaluation, right? So then we're doing this other evaluation. What have you done in the past to like distinguish it clearly in terms of the questions asked?
Right. And that's why I try to ask as few questions as possible and make it not redundant to those questions at all. So, like, what are the specific questions that really get at this of like, do you feel prepared? Do you feel like, those pieces? I also think we usually link them back to the standards to make sure that the standards for this course are being addressed. So you don't have to ask them about all the standards, but if you're doing it at a course level, you could do that. Or like in this semester, these were all the standards that were covered. How comfortable do you feel? How knowledgeable do you feel about what was expressed in those standards? Which is very different than, are you satisfied with your professor? Things were well organized, like those pieces. So I try to make it so like it's very clear this isn't just about like, you know, the logic model has nothing about satisfaction with professors. Universities care about that. What we care about is, as a future practitioner in the field, are you gaining the knowledge and skills that's building you towards having those standards we need you to have as you exit and go and work with students with disabilities, right? Like that at the end of the day it is. So I think if I can keep it focused on that, that's how I would do that. Great question. So let's try it. Let's take 5 minutes and think about 2 to 3 survey questions that would help get you at this idea. So why don't you put them in the chat? And so at 4:30 we'll come back and then we'll kind of hit send and we'll look through some of the questions that you all develop. And then we're going to talk about what other information would you need to demonstrate that their knowledge and skill. So let's take 5 minutes, think of some questions, and at 4:30 we'll come back together, go over those questions. Oh, I love this. Right. On a scale of 1 to 5, being, confidence, how confident do you feel about generalizing what you learned in class to your future classroom? Like, right. Great. Perfect question, right? It's like that. Have you assessed students with visual impairments? Can you teach the expanded core curriculum? Can you be effective collaborator? Those are great questions. Um, Besides survey questions, what other information could you use to demonstrate that the students are knowledgeable and skilled? Like what other sources of information could you have? I love what was just placed too. Like another, those were great sentences, right? I know how to do progress monitoring. I know how to implement evidence-based instruction. I know academic, social, and functional outcomes for students. That's awesome. Those are all really great things, right? Simple to the point, right? I think we have some great models here of things for that. What other types of information could you collect, right? Like you have the syllabi that show this, you have the surveys. Is there other information you could collect to show that they're knowledgeable and skilled? You could have them have some sort of portfolio of work that they're collecting as they go that demonstrates that they're developing the skills. The rubrics from projects, that's a really great point. That's another part of it too, right? So you can show like there was this assessment, they got these scores on these rubrics, like they're not only have they done it, but you can say that you've given them the feedback that moves them in that direction to be competent implementers of evidence-based practices, right? Like that, there's that piece of it, and that to be good collaborators, to be good professionals in the field. Great. So that's like, if we think about evaluation, we start thinking about student evaluation. That's kind of where we are. If we were going to think about if they're graduating, we want to know all of this. How would we go about asking these questions along the way? Like what should our schedule be for that? And how do we break that down, right? Because we want to know that they're progressing towards something, but we also don't want to be surveying them all over survey them because then there's survey fatigue, right? If you survey them too much, they stop paying attention to the surveys and they stop doing those things. So I think thinking about at the end of every semester, what are the questions you ask? How do you make sure you're demonstrating the growth? And then what do you go from there? How do you make sure that you're thinking about all of the other ways that you can collect data in terms of the work that they develop and create through the courses, making sure that all of those things work together and work seamlessly and smoothly. And what questions do all of you have, or comments or frivolous statements?
I have a question.
Oh, please.
So I was just thinking as you were walking through, we have several other programs, obviously, that we collect artifacts from for CAPE and our state reporting and EdTPA. Would it be expeditious, maybe, that we think about the project and maybe any of the unique things that we're looking at that may not already be in those measures, and think about, like, not to overdo it, but maybe tweak some of the measures we have that we would be collecting data for our project as well.
I think that's exactly what I would do. I would look to say, like, if we know that we have, like, don't reinvent the wheel and don't add things that
Right.
you don't need. But if there are things that you want to know for this specific program, how can we include them in addition to those things? And,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where you could do like a crosswalk of what's already being collected through your teacher preparation program. And
Mm-hmm.
then for this program, is there anything that in addition that needs to be for this specific set of teachers learning this specific set of skills in this program, right? I
Right.
think that would be really useful to say, like, this is where this all crosswalks, and these are just the 5 to 10 things, maybe even
Mm-hmm.
less, maybe 3 to 5 things that we need to collect additional information on. But otherwise, the system we have collects everything else that we need. So,
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Like, and so much of this, we already have something set up, but there are some buzzwords that are in here that may not be easily translated in what we already have.
right. And you have to make sure you have those pieces like really delineated and out there.
Mm-hmm.
Especially, depending on who you're reporting this information to, that, making sure that those, as you said, buzzwords align with what they, OSEP wants evidence-based practices. Accreditors want to know that standards are being met. Like, right, how do you make sure
Yes,
all of those things align and show that alignment together as well? And that's where I think theoretically the standard should be about implementing evidence-based practices, right?
of
Like, so,
course, of course.
so it's like you have to kind of work backwards from the standards to say these standards are evidence-based practices. So we've used them as our guide because the standards in our fields have told us these are the actions and behaviors that people need to do in order to implement the interventions that are going to be effective for students,
Sure.
and the clinical practices that we need in place. So I think all of that. So definitely don't reinvent the wheel and definitely use resources that are there. But I think, as you said, what are the few things we might need to customize when we have another audience we have to report to that we need to give some information. But if you can also show, though, this other survey, they said that they're getting all of the information they need from all of the standards. Great, they're doing that. And those are the things that are in place that we know that those standards are evidence-based as well.
Yeah. So our logic model, some of the things that we looked at is that our candidates would see modeled the evidence-based practices. And even though we have a clinical field experience office and they sort of collect data on the candidate's experience in the field, probably not to what we intended by our project.
Right,
And then,
exactly. Right. You have to get that little bit more. It's more about satisfaction usually versus like you want to know, did the student see what they were supposed to see in that setting, right?
and
Like that.
I honestly don't even think they really are asking that. It's like, would you recommend this teacher for the
Oh,
future?
yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's probably so it made me think, and then I might be crossing into somebody else's area, but it's probably a departmental and program conversation that we really need to have.
Right, right. Right. You for especially for, in this world of like, we want to know that they've had exposure and they've seen them in the real world. That's beyond just like, would you recommend this placement or not? Right. And how do we gather
Yes.
that information as well?
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. What are others questions? Portfolio platforms. Oh, I will give a couple recommendations. I don't have anything off the cuff on that because I want to ask a couple people about recommendations. I don't want to give you a bad recommendation in terms of portfolio platforms because there are bad portfolio platforms. So I will follow up and get a recommendation on that. And then there's some links to a couple just evaluation toolkits that were created, one by Westat, one by IES, that kind of just give you more information about program evaluation in general and just other ideas and things and like how to actualize a logic model and all of those pieces. So these are, if you need additional resources, they're there.
Thank you all so much. The questions were great. The comments were great. what we would like to do is, first of all, thank you so much, Dr. Gelbar, for spending this time with us and talking about this very important topic. We have great attendance and great engagement, which is telling about how important this information truly is. What we will be doing is sharing quite a bit of this information with you all as follow-up, but we thought we would absolutely be remiss if we did not acknowledge that we are all in APR season. And so we wanted to go through some reminders as we begin to kind of just wrap things up on the side of APR. And so before jumping into that, we wanted to just take a really quick poll and get a good sense of where everyone is in the APR process. And so you should have seen a poll pop up. Good, I see some that are responding. Did you just open it? Are you making progress? Are you almost done? And then who has submitted and feels like they can finally breathe again? Good, I see a lot of responses coming in. Many of you all are making some progress. You're checking those boxes off and getting things done. A few of you are almost done. Some are just kind of beginning the process, and that's absolutely okay as well. And I see that some are ready to submit, but waiting maybe for a little bit of feedback. And so connecting those dots along the way, hugely important. We want to be sure that everyone is on track and taking care of what needs to be done on the side of the APR. And so with that in mind, we did want to just provide a few quick reminders with regard to APR. First, listen, please make sure that you're maintaining communication with OSEP. It's hugely important for you to be able to get those check-ins taken care of, as well as any questions or any wanderings that you might have actually answered. And then we want to be sure that you're always checking your data and your alignment with your goals. Nick touched on quite a few things that you'll want to check in on, and that stands true for sure for the APR process. So please be sure that you're double checking everything. And then you want to tap a lot of the resources that have been shared. And so we want to remind you of those OSEP resources that are available, as well as the DREAM resources. Two great resources from OSEP you'll see actually on this page. There is that actual slide deck that is available that covers the APR process. It's a specific guide that was released back in January. And then there's the website that you all can actually access as well that walks through all of the resources that are available through OSEP. And so we'll be sure to share these things out as well. And then we wanted to spend some time also touching on some of the recordings that are available through DREAM. And so if you visit our YouTube page, you'll see that you do have direct access to the APR recorded webinars that we've done in the past. You'll see that G5 walkthrough. So some of you all said you're right there, you're ready, you're kind of at the point of being able to submit. You may want to revisit our step-by-step walkthrough of the process of submitting the APR through the G5 platform. I will say it is one of our most frequented videos. So if you have not touched upon it, it definitely takes some time and access that there. And then we also have our YouTube video that covers the overall annual performance report, giving you key components as well as walking you through any requirements to make sure that you do have a strong error-free APR submission. So stop by our YouTube channel, please, and check out some of those available videos that are there for you. We also wanted to remind you of some of our great resources that are available as well. You have your planning checklist, and it walks you through. Have you touched on every area from setup all the way through those final steps through submission? Because there's some variance in the whole group, you might want to download this checklist. And in fact, I strongly encourage you to do so to see exactly where you are in the process, as well as to be sure that you've touched on all of the key things. And then we have our 10 common errors and solutions with regard to the APR. And so if some of you all had great questions throughout with regard to the program evaluation, but in thinking about your APR, if you have questions, some of them might have been addressed, and this checklist might also allow you to actually see if you have potentially made any errors that can be very quickly self-corrected as you're finalizing things. So please take a moment and check out that resource as well. And then we wanted to just let you all know that in line with that, we also have come up with a resource that covers all of the common pitfalls that can be made. And so this may be something that you might want to peruse, and just be sure that you're making sure that you're not one who's making any of these errors in your practice. And so it's a great resource to just check back in on as you are working through the remainder of the year. And so please take a moment and check out this great resource as well.